Okay, there we go. I'll stop sharing while we're doing this. All right, Ben, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ben Hamlin. I'm a longtime Odyssey groupie. I've tried to become a collaborator in one of my organizations. I've actually had a lot of data to share in the network areas. I've mostly been focused on the network data quality group and the CDM group to the main extent. Lately, also in the fire to OMOP work that's been happening across the HL7 and Odyssey communities. My specialty area is in quality and quality measurement, specifically digital quality, around patient-centeredness and patient-reported outcomes, which is why Claire said I really need to talk to you guys because I'm currently working on a cross-domain project on patient-reported outcomes and the various standards that are related. And it looks like from your agendas, this is exactly where you guys are working as well. So I'm glad I was connected with you guys. So.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad you could join us. And then Julia, I'm sorry, have you been on before?
Yes, I've been on before. I'm from
Okay.
Our Future Health. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So last time Piper was presenting the work she's been doing, and we ran out of time to kind of get to the juicy wrap-up part. So I thought we'd go ahead and start with letting Piper finish up, and then we'll move on to talk about our items for the vocabulary-a-thon, or sorry, vocabulathon, and workshop at the upcoming Global Symposium. So, Piper, why don't you go ahead and take over and you can share the screen and whatnot.
Okay. And I also just want to say I am lucky enough to be getting a crown put on today. So I actually will need to cut out of our meeting a little bit early today. I'm going to go really fast because I actually am hoping, Nicole, that you will get to I think in a previous call, you proposed a sort of model for representing the assessments, and I couldn't seem to find the slides from that, but I'd be really interested in seeing that and how that compares to what the Odyssey Psychiatry Working Group has been talking about. So
Yeah,
right.
I'll have to dig that up. I have to admit, I'm not always the best about asking for slides after a presentation. So there'll be the full recording, but I know what you're talking about, and I'll see if I can track those down.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So I will share and let's see. Okay. So so we were talking a little bit about how assessments are represented in SNOMED and LOINC. So both SNOMED and LOINC have significant survey or assessment instrument content. LOINC has a semantic model. SNOMED does not have a semantic model or concept model. And when I say semantic model, of course, I just mean it has those defining relationships other than ISA, right? Like a procedure has a finding site, those kind of things. So, so thinking about how we make SNOMED CT fit for purpose, SNOMED currently does not have a concept model for staging and scales, right? Those are assessment scales. And so I developed a concept model and have been testing a concept model. And this is just sort of a list of the data sources. And this is work that the information model itself is work that I did as part of my dissertation study. And essentially I looked at all of the industry standard sort of representations of assessment scales and instruments kind of across the health enterprise. And then I looked at, well, how do they define assessments? What are the essential features, and sort of harmonized it and came up with a standard model. And this is just a graphic of a preliminary concept model. So this if you think about an assessment scale or an assessment instrument, these are, when you look across the health enterprise, you look at what appears over and over and over again in databases, models, encyclopedia. These are kind of the core attributes, right? And of course, this construct, this is the thing that the scale measures, right? So this would be anxiety or depression. And then these are some of the other features. And again, this is sort of harmonized. And then I just sort of picked a generic name. And then here are some potential value sets. These were what I considered the high value sort of preliminary candidates defining attributes for defining an assessment scale. This is just a table that is in a paper we're publishing, and this has the attributes and then the definition. And then, of course, because I'm proposing this for SNOMED, this defines the range of values. And this is sort of how SNOMED in their editorial guides sort of define concept models. This is a simplified version. This is the way that.
Oh, Piper, I'm just going to pause you for a second because I think Ben had a question on your previous slide. Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm sorry, this is probably a basic question. I'm just trying to get caught up on all this information.
Yeah.
Because again, this is very relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish on the harmonization side. Given the importance of the attribute value pairing that is prevalent in LOINC already, and that is so important to pairing a specific question with a specific value or response category, why are we trying to fit SNOMED as fit for purpose? Why aren't we just sticking with LOINC that already does this?
Yeah, good question.
Thanks.
So LOINC, so we need both. LOINC's semantic model uses it just uses a controlled vocabulary for each field. Okay, so what we need LOINC for is we need LOINC for the questions and the answers. We also need LOINC. So of course, LOINC relates the question to the scale, right? The instrument in which the question appears. LOINC is absolutely critical for that. SNOMED will never have the questions and the terminology. What we need SNOMED for, and Ben, I'm sure you're aware of the LOINC SNOMED ontology. Is that something that's it's newer?
Yeah.
Are you familiar?
I'm aware of it. I'm not familiar with it. That's fair.
Okay, yeah. So it was an agreement. I think the agreement was made at the very end of 2022. And it has now been released to the public. So if you look at the browser, but essentially what it is it is taking LOINC, and just like you'll go to a SNOMED browser and you can, search for SNOMED terms, you can see the entire terminology in a SNOMED browser. It is LOINC in a SNOMED browser. And so what they're doing is they're essentially putting LOINC in SNOMED and, yes, they've created a SNOMED extension that contains LOINC. The reason that we need, so LOINC does not have a concept model for assessment instruments or scales. There is no way, so example, if you were to look at for example, the Beck depression inventory, right? There is no way to retreat to know that measures depression, right? Or is used to screen for depression. Those are really important pieces of information. So if you look at the attributes in this graphic, as well as this table, what you'll see is there are many attributes that don't exist in LOINC. It would be virtually impossible to squeeze those into the 6 axes that LOINC has available, right? And I'll say none of this relates to questions and answers. So what we're proposing for SNOMED is strictly at the level of scores, assessment procedures, and then assessment scales themselves.
So I don't want to be contrarian. So this is one of the issues that stimulated this project that I'm working on, is the practice of treating patient-reported information as clinical impression. So it was
Say that
formally
again?
been, so it's treating patient-reported information. Sorry, I'm in a loud place in the conference. Treating patient-reported information as clinical impressions or observations, as opposed to treating it specifically as a piece of patient-reported information that is used as part of the clinical reasoning process. So in like Fireland and in I'm guessing in sort of in Odyssey, OMOP land, these have been sort of thought of as observations, or they've been thought of as, you know, clinical impressions or things that are several steps down the pathway from the actual piece of patient-reported information that's like right for the so essential on the attribute value pairing piece, which is so well modeled in LOINC, because the way these are being used in the quality realm for measurement purposes and for patient safety purposes and effectiveness of care is where you're actually using these over time to measure response to treatments in particular.
Yes.
Which you really need that very specific, like I don't you don't care that the BEC or the PHQ-9 are used for depression screening. You need to know that you are using this specific instrument repeatedly, the same instrument asking the same question over time, and you need the actual value of that piece of information from that. So this is what, and I'm like, that gets lost, I think, in the greater conversation of adding additional attributes to these questions or to these instruments and things like that. So that's why I'm really trying to work through focusing on like what's in the CoreNet as far as the level of data and attributes and metadata that's associated with in their ProCM table, I think, and trying to get that across the other standard, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
So
that's why I'm asking these questions. But I don't, like I said, I don't mean to be contrarian. This is why I'm sort of I'm trying to push these out there in the universe.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree with you. And so your observation, particularly about treating these as observations or clinical impressions, is spot on, right? There's a distinction between a psychometrically validated assessment instrument, which has been demonstrated to have scientific properties and is a measurement on par with a lab test, right? You're measuring response to treatment, right? So it is a measurement. However, not all there's a distinction between a psychometrically validated assessment instrument, which is essentially a mental health laboratory test, and a questionnaire, right? A questionnaire is just a series of questions and answers. And if it's not a psychometrically validated assessment instrument, and then it is simply a clinical observation. However, if the question is asked as part of a validated instrument, it is actually a measurement, and the score that it yields has meaning above and beyond any of the individual questions or observations within each of the questions. So
and that's true. I think the issue though is that a lot of times there's a standard question when in some of the like the audit C, there's a single question and like screener that you can essentially use as almost an instrument. But also the fact that people are using the individual screening questions of those instruments and modeling those as a questionnaire and questionnaire response or question and question response. And so people are moving in that direction. In the quality measurement domain, we've been focused on the total score of questionnaires, which I think is closer to an observation.
Yes.
again, I think as people are starting to, I don't think that distinction is well understood across the domains, I think, which is something that's really essential as we work on this area, that we make that essentially clear about, if you're talking about a question, whether it's a survey, whether it's a part of a prom, or whether it's just a single screener question, how you're handling that question and the value that's associated with that specific question, in a standardized and clinically valid manner.
So yeah, so Ben, I'm also fairly new to this group, and I think, and I don't want to take up much more time because I know we have a long agenda.
Yeah,
No.
I appreciate the discussion, but I was going to say the same thing. We
Yeah.
maybe spend 10 more minutes either going through your slides or
No,
discussing.
actually,
And then I wanted to switch, to talking about the planning
yes.
our events. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm done with my slides. I was just sort of showing the concept model, but I think, I think Ben's question is similar to the question that I have, which is, my impression is that the OMOP survey working group has been focused on, or I guess it's more of a question, is the focus on question answer and then meaning representing the clinical finding that corresponds to the answer? Or has this working group been equally focused on the scale itself, representing scales, scores, questions, answers, the whole shebang?
Yeah. So I was going to say, we're still super early. So the talk, a lot of what we've been trying to do is figure out where we are, like who's doing what the needs are, what some of the low hanging fruit we could tackle, things like that. And the slides I believe you were talking about earlier, we're sort of getting at that. Like as we start, and this kind of segues nicely into the discussion we wanted to have about things we want to tackle at the Global Symposium, is there's kind of two paths we can follow. One is sort of looking at survey results as facts, right? So we map it as a fact, so which would go into a condition or a measurement or whatever. So, has a medical professional ever told you that you have asthma? And then you just map to the fact that you've got, patient reported asthma. But then there's also been talk of the value of those questions. And I think that, sorry, I'm going to back myself up a bit, that I think that fits into your scores, right? So the score is a measurement. You take the assessment, you get a score. That score is a measurement, and that measurement maybe has an indication of an observation or a condition that can also be associated with that. And then the other path is more what you were talking about with Ben, when you kind of have these psychometric instruments versus, surveys that are sort of information gathering. Although mapping both the question and answer can apply to both situations, but then there's like, yes, do we try to map those question answer pairs, and what needs to be done with the CDM and vocabulary to be able to do that. So the lower hanging fruit is probably mapping as fact, because the CDM is set up to handle that. Getting to mapping those question answer pairs, I think, is definitely a larger lift. So I think one of the things, so they're not mutually exclusive. Both these things can be done. I think part of it is kind of prioritizing what path to start drilling down into, and trying to make, starting to put together some guidelines or best practices for how you approach each of these things. So mapping as a fact versus mapping as question answer pairs. And then sort of the next step is, and again, we'll probably see this more for the question answer pairs, is what, expansion tables or, recommendations to famous or whatever do we need to do to accommodate mapping those question answer pairs. And then for both of those, I think we need use cases. One of the things that came up from sort of the planning survey I sent out is shoot, I had a thought and it just left before I got to the end of the sentence. I've been traveling and it really messes with my zen. So anyhow, but I think we basically want use cases for each of these things, because it may be that yes, there's a great deal of harmonization and tooling that can be done with question answer pairs, and this is worth pursuing as part of the OMOP common data model. Or it may be, there's some analyses that you do with questionnaires that really don't have anything to do with needing to be in the CDM. They're just the typical things you ask when you analyze survey data. So I think one of the things we have to do too is sort of prioritize which path do we want to work on? What are the use cases? And depending on the amount of interest, we could also have two sub working groups, a group that's working on how we do this for facts and how we do this for question answer pairs. But I think we definitely want the use cases to back up, both or which, we want to start putting our time into. So that's kind of where we are. We're into sort of these, we've gathered, I guess, I feel like I will continue. One of the things I'm going to do at the Global Symposium is keep launching, is make the landscape assessment available. I'm hoping we can maybe gather a few people in the net that we haven't gotten before. So we're going to have a poster there and I'll have a QR code so that people can do that landscape if they have it. But I do think in terms of what our goals are, we also have to work with the information we've gathered so far and try to move forward some of these guidelines, best practices, and then recommendations to, what we need to do for vocabulary or for CDM tables or for themis to start trying to work in surveys so we can harmonize. And also I think a lot of us would like to be able to use that survey data with the EHR data we've got that's already mapped to OMOP.
Yeah, my core focus was a themis convention because like I said in the chat, I reviewed a bunch of pro-related submissions for the Global Symposium this year as part of the SPC, and I saw every single one had their own process for mapping into OMOP and using this information in OMOP. And that was like the light that went off. Like, okay, we need to something here. So I've been working with Melanie to try and figure that out. And she's like, well, you got to talk to these guys. You got to talk to these guys. So
yeah.
Now
that we have a work group, we want to move away from the silo thing because people have been using it, and from what I've seen in a lot of the use cases that have come across this group is it's like, all right, we want to take advantage of the OMOP tools. I think some of it is trying to plan for the future. Like if I get this in OMOP and we eventually get the survey group, get plans, all of my data posted. But I think there's so much working in a silo. We're not getting any cross collaboration with the groups who have worked on their own mapping efforts. And that's such a lot of work to do to not be able to get the full benefit of OMOP, which is just not being able to use the tooling, but also being able to harmonize and pool your data, across these other studies. So we hopefully, and I think, like Ben, you found us, and I know other people found us in the last 6 months or so. And I'm very grateful to Anna, because I know she keeps, when people ask vocabulary questions about surveys, she sends you to us. So I'm very grateful she's doing that. So I think, we want to step away from the
did your
silo
landscape
work.
assessment include the CoreNet data model? Because I mean, again, there's a lot of really useful information there, especially on the data quality side for that, which is another angle that
I would be happy for you to fill it out, Ben, and share.
I will. I'm on it. So I'm working together the proposal for this in the details, and I will be happily share that with this group as soon as I get it finished. I just been distracted by.
That would be fantastic. So I'll, after the call, sometime today I'll send you the link to it because we never closed the survey. Perfect. And you can go ahead and take that. That would be great.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah. I also have a lot of quality use cases that I can provide as well. So.
Yes, that'd be helpful. Are you going to be at the Global Symposium?
I am. Wednesday and Thursday. I'm not there for Tuesday.
Okay, so we'll be able to catch you for the survey workshop then, the CDM survey workshop, just not for the vocabulathon.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, Piper?
Yeah, so I also wanted to mention to your point, Nicole, about folks working in silos, the Odyssey Psychiatry Working Group is coming up with a model. So I think it's important. And I shared our list of assessments, and I shared it broadly with folks in this group and the psychiatry working group. And Nicole, you were the only one that responded to that email.
Oh,
And
no.
so no.
Yeah.
And I thought about it after the fact, and I get this. And I think this is one of the things we need to kind of solve for in terms of the silos, is that so many of us work in academia, right? And so ideas and papers and publications are sort of the currency of our field. And I think that one of the things, and of course, everybody wants to come out and publish something, right? Something new and different and unique. And I myself am in that boat, but I also recognize that we're not actually going to get traction and solve the problems if we don't work together. So I think so, Ben, I also would like to invite you to attend the Odyssey Psychiatry Working Group. And I think that it would be important for us to arrange sooner rather than later a collaborative meeting between psychiatry and the OMOP survey working group. And I also noted, I will be at the symposium, but I noted that the survey working group and the psychiatry working group are meeting at the
At
same
the
time.
same time. Oh, no.
And I think it's so important that psychiatry folks attend the survey working group, and conversely, the survey working group.
No, I think that's a really important point. Who's the lead for the psychology working group?
So it was Andrew Williams.
Oh, okay.
And so now it is Cal.
Okay.
Calum, what is his last name? I will send it to you. But Dima and Cal together are co-leading it.
Okay.
And I will
Because I'm
tell
wondering
you.
if maybe.
Go ahead.
If maybe we could just go ahead and combine our work groups. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out like
Yes.
what their, if the psychology work group doesn't have a specific agenda, depending on how far they're, because I certainly don't want to take away from something that work group has planned. But if we could have a workshop for the end of that Thursday, I think that would be fantastic, because I know Andrew was really helpful, when we started developing. He was also trying to make contacts for me with a psychology group and things like that. And so but it would be great to take that to like the next level. And yeah, I can reach out, or maybe if you could send an email introducing me to the leads, and then we can have a discussion about maybe combining that workshop. Because you guys are definitely further ahead than we are in the efforts you've made for the psychology work, and there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And I think it's just pulling that, what can we pull over and then sort of make more generic so that it applies outside of the psychology working group, to make it more broadly applicable. But yeah, I've been trying, I've been hunting down people. I can't think of her last name. There's another, there was an Anne that is working on the AIDS and climate change, or HIV and climate change group, and they've got a bunch of survey work that they're doing as well. So that was somebody that Andrew had connected me with. And so she doesn't come to these, but I've met with her a couple times. They're talking, I think we're close to getting them done enough that they'll share their GitHub code, because that's the other thing I'm trying to do. Like, I want us to stop working in silos, but until we're at a place where we can make good recommendations, I at least want to put out all the information that we have on who's doing what. So at least if we can't like connect all the dots, at least if someone's working on this survey that somebody else has worked on, at least that can be done in a similar way, or they can use each other's code. So at least we can sort of start grouping things so that once we have a more holistic approach, you don't have everybody doing something unique. You start having groups of people doing the same things, or at least having a resource for when they're trying to get started, because there's just not the information out there for this. So
Yeah.
that, some of
Well,
this
and
we're starting to get posted for the wiki, and it'll be solidified on the poster. And then we'll have the poster available.
I found
there's
out about
really,
Piper's model this morning from Vivero, and I was having coffee with her at the conference. And I was like, I didn't even know this was like a psychiatric working group was working on something similar. And she just said, "Oh, you got to talk to Piper because I know you're going to the survey group, but like the psychiatry working group's been doing this for a while now." And I'm like, really? How do I
Yeah.
know about this?
Well, it's hard. I mean, it's an awesome community, but it's also got like 75 balls in the air at the same time. So I think it's kind of hard to always figure out who's doing what, unless you've got people who know things across groups starting to make these connections, like Andrew and Anna, and Alex taking up from Anna and pulling us in here, and things like that. So sorry, Alexander. I didn't assume you prefer to be called Alexander, but I sometimes get short names. But anyhow, so yeah, I think we're finally starting to make those connections, and I think potentially doing a joint workshop with psychology
psychiatry.
and
Yeah.
the survey group
Yeah.
would be great. So
Yeah.
then we've kind of got two joints. We've got the vocabulathon, and then we'll in the psychology work group. And I think that will certainly help us get some momentum, and also just have a better understanding of what's already available that we don't have to figure out. We just have to make it more broadly applicable.
And so one of the questions I have, Nicole, and this is one of the things I personally have struggled with, and the psychiatry working group has struggled with, is how much, I mean, is the vision to create a alternate model within the OMOP extension, right? I mean, because there's the content, and that's just the names of the questions and the scales and the
Mhm.
scores and whatever. But then there's the model, right? The relationships that we create. So
Yeah.
how much of the vision is is the vision to create a new sort of survey semantic type, right? Or class within
Mhm.
the OMOP extension, or is the goal to figure out how we better harmonize the content and the relationships from the source vocabularies?
I see. I'm going to say both. So one of the things I found with pretty much everything I do these days is it's all iterative, right? So you kind of have to pick a place to start, and then see where that takes you as you continue to develop and get use cases. So I think there's certainly openness to doing things like extension tables, or adding, like keep bringing up Themis. I think it's another group we need to like be talking to, and cross purpose for like recommendations. So
Yep.
to what extent, and this is a question we need to ask ourselves, to what extent do we want to fit into the current CDM with maybe adding vocabulary that better expresses the surveys, so that we can harmonize across surveys, but also interact with EHR and claims data and things like that, versus, do we want this sub area, that survey data, and have something that's very specific to just harmonizing across surveys? And again, these things are not mutually exclusive, but I think it's kind of trying to decide, where do we want to start? What's the most bang for our buck in terms of effort? Do we have enough interest in sort of both pathways to have subgroups tackle each of these things? Do we need to prioritize one? These are definitely not things we're going to get done in a year. These are things we're going to make. What I'm really hoping for is, regular progress, so that each
Yep.
each year or each quarter or something, depending where we have things, we can say, okay, like I think what we have to show for our effort so far is, okay, this is what we've been able to gather about what people are doing with surveys. And then I think our next step is going to be okay, this is our understanding of how people want to use surveys and OMOP together, and now we're going to prioritize how to integrate it. And then we'll have those priorities. So I think that, I just see this as something that's being very iterative. I think,
Yep.
as we get in the weeds, there will probably be course correction or, oh, wait, this is not useful the way I thought it was going to be. Maybe we need to think about this other approach. But it's been really great to see some of the increased diversity and other proposals. Like I think I saw Stephanie Hung is on this call, and they've been working on a way to integrate the surveys and stuff. And so I also think one of the other things we need, and I know like the CDM group has this, Alexander, I assume the vocabulary group has this as well. We also sort of need a way of sort of reviewing and deciding how we will, accept proposed mechanisms for doing this. Because even though we're trying to centralize these efforts now, as we've said, these are going on the side. So are there things from how Stephanie's group has been approaching this, and the psychology group, that we can just adopt as part of what we consider, part of the best practices or guidelines or model? So we need a way to kind of evaluate what's been done in terms of making like what's an official, guideline. And this is, what we want to get everybody on the same track doing it, this way, so that more and more of the data becomes interoperable.
To your point about sort of prioritizing and moving slowly, there's a lot of content right now in OMOP. So for like looking just at content that exists both in LOINC and SNOMED, right? So say the Beck Depression Inventory Score.
Mm-hmm.
That data, oftentimes you'll have the same piece of information and it's standard in both, right? So there hasn't, and Alexander, I think you know this, right? If it comes from LOINC, it's in the observation domain. If it comes from SNOMED, it's in the measurement domain, right? Because it's an observable entity. A score in SNOMED is an observable entity. A score in LOINC is in the survey class. Okay, so class ID is survey class for LOINC, and it is observable entity for SNOMED. And then they're also in different domains. So, I mean, as a very first step, and again, I don't know, Nicole, when I think we need to be more precise in when we say survey, are we talking about surveys or are we talking about assessment scales, right? Are we talking
Mm-hmm.
about the assessment scales that are used not just in mental health, but they're used for, pain
Right.
scales, right?
Yeah,
So,
all of
and you guys, go ahead.
oh, no. So, and I guess that's something else we could talk about too. There's one that's part of what we're doing for the segment in the book chapter on different kinds of data. But yeah, so when I say survey, I think anything that's patient reported. And so maybe there's something we need to say more generically. So in my mind, that covers these scales. It's basically how we get data from patients that is not, based
Will
on a
always
lab test
self-report.
or yeah, so
Okay.
it's all
Is it always
self-report.
self-report? Or could it be like a lot of times a parent? So for assessment skills in mental health, sometimes a parent or a teacher will answer a questionnaire about
Mhm.
the child. So maybe that's one thing, just even
Mhm.
defining, because
Yeah, trying to figure out how, or do we want like do we want to have, scales, patient reported scales, scales reported by, because I also know things like, what was it? Um, it's the assessment for schizophrenia, but it's conducted by an interviewer. So
clinician
an interview, yeah,
administered. Yep.
yeah.
So
And so we've
yeah.
got clinician administered, patient administered, like maybe, like you said, a family member or teacher or somebody else. But it's, maybe our very broad definition is, well, yeah, I was gonna say data not collected clinically, but then we just said we have clinically administered. Yeah, so I think we need to think about, like I said, I
So
kind of came at it from the patient reported, but how do we expand that? Do we want to, create different subcategories? And then, for some things like, scales and psychometric evaluations, mapping facts may be very effective, whereas some other things, information gathering about medical history, is more the
Mhm.
question answer pairs. So yeah, that's something we might need to
that's
further
one of the things
elaborate.
I'd like to. I sorry to keep harping on Procornet, but
Oh
again,
no,
that's
that's
one of the
fine.
areas where they have those elements already existing for designating whether it's a ClinRo or a Pro. They also have elements about whether it's computer adaptive tests, like if it was a
Yep.
cat versus
Mm-hmm.
like an individual something. Like these are all exist in other models, and I just think again these are critical pieces of information together. I don't know whether the metadata, whether you consider them a measurement, whether you consider them an observation, or there's something in between. But it'd be really wonderful if we could just have some clarity about this and propose that, as part of this work group's, work is to help people understand what these are and then what to do with them when you know you have them or when you don't have them.
Yeah.
You could have these responses, but you don't know what they
Yeah.
are in terms of like what was the mode of collection, what was the what type of question were you asking even, and sometimes that's in the vocabulary, like it's in like sometimes, but it's not. And so again, I think there's a lot that we could make in a very early headway just by sort of
Yes.
taking all the survey information, putting it together and making it comprehensible for secondary use.
And to your, so Ben, you think about like cognitive assessments, right? Sometimes you're asking with the MOCA, you're drawing a clock, right? Or you're repeating a list. So surveys are questions and answers, but more broadly, there's a stimulus and a response, right? So it might
Right.
be you're asking the child to stack the blocks for an IQ test, right? So you're working with the blocks. So there's a whole broad range. And I think what's interesting to me is that there is a subset of psychometrically validated assessments that are essentially questionnaires, right? It's question and answer. Other times it's a clinician passively observing a patient and rating
Yeah.
them, right? And that's with some of the psychosis stuff. So I think that's a really good starting place
Yeah.
to really define the scope of what we're talking about. And maybe Nicole, maybe that's a way that we can sort of give different groups of folks a smaller subspace or scope of work to
Mm-hmm.
focus on and have ownership
Yeah.
over. And
Yeah.
I'm now aware that you have a full agenda, and I feel like I've been monopolizing with my questions, so I'm going to stop.
No, but this has been a good
And
discussion because it really is, it's a challenge to drill down. And, we only meet 2 hours a month right now. And so, I think that's been fine for information gathering, and some of the sharing out and stuff. I think this has worked well, but we're going to have to figure out, on one end, I'd almost rather lose a toe than add any more meetings to my calendar. But on the other, we probably, as we go through, the agenda that I had were just based on the feedback that you guys gave to that survey I sent out last week on just kind of getting ideas for the drill down. But I certainly appreciate this discussion because that's what we've been doing is like, okay, we need to define survey and what are, subtypes or whatever. Then we need, and then associate that with proposals that are out there, that are being looked at for incorporation, or what the psychology
yeah,
group has done. And then what things can we keep, move forward that's already in progress, and then what things need to be built from the ground up, and then how do we triage it. And I think one of the things that's going to be a challenge, because we all have this interest in survey, but we also have jobs that require us to do a whole lot of other things besides this, is can we get enough momentum or enough interest to start maybe creating these sub working groups to investigate
Yes.
each of these areas in more detail, and then use these monthly meetings for sort of reporting back and collating. So I think that's one of the other things we want to see if we can establish at these workshops when we have time to sit down for a while is can we do this? Can we get these little, smaller groups? Because I think we're hitting some limits in productivity of what we can do in 2 hours a month.
Yep. And I have to run to get my crown put on. But
it's so funny when you first said that, I was like, "You're getting a crown." Like I'm thinking crown on the head.
I wish.
And
yes.
then I was like, "Oh wait, tooth." Okay.
Yeah. Nope. I had the root canal. Now I got to get the crown on my tooth. Yeah. No fun.
Ouch.
But before I go, I'll just say, so Ben, I would love to talk more with you. And Nicole, I will follow up with an email when I get back. And I, for one, I'm like, I, for one, am open to arranging another time that any of us on the call that are interested in meeting would want to talk, because I think, I think it would be almost worth arranging something with the psychiatry working group before the symposium. And then I think maybe I can just share some stuff with you through email asynchronously, so as to not take up too much of the meeting time to talk about stuff.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what we'll try to do, and Michelle is on a train right now, but I know she'll help collate the notes for this. And then, and then we have one more of these meetings before the symposium. So I think we kind of distill what's been said today and the responses to the survey from last week, and kind of, at least my life philosophy is have a plan, be prepared to change it. So, so basically what I want to do is kind of have a plan for what we're going to try to tackle at the vocabulary-thon and the workshop, but with the idea that once we're kind of in the room and having some synergy, we may deter to that. It may produce some other things that are not necessarily bulleted out, but I think we definitely want to have a place to start. So we'll try to refine sort of this discussion and the survey things into bullet points to go through next week or next time we meet.
Okay.
All right.
And
Thanks,
I will
Piper.
email you. Okay. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, so it's been mostly me and Piper and Ben. So I think we've got 10 minutes left. Anybody else listening to this chat have some things they want to throw into the mix? I can also pull up the minutes with sort of the AI summary from the survey responses if we want to talk about those.
Nicole, can you send me the survey, and I'll do my best to fill it out if we can get it back to you so you can have all the.
Yeah, I will
my
I'll
brain
send
dump.
you both. I'll send you the planning survey
Okay.
link, and I'll send you the landscape assessment.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, great.
So Nicole, a couple of questions, right? I went through the survey stuff, and it feels like there are a bunch of specific topics, right? So what are we going to do with the history? What are we going to do with the negative information? What are we going to do with the finding, timing, and all this sort of things? But it feels like there's still a general problem that is not maybe outlined here, like in general, right?
Mhm.
And that would be something that we've been discussing in this small group with Anna, Kristen, and Melanie, right?
Mhm.
So what I would also suggest to do is, if somebody goes through, well, the meeting agenda, the email chains, and all the discussions that we have, and then present it to the working group, right? So could be next session or the
Mhm.
vocabulathon right away, but I think it would be important to sort of communicate this preliminary work that has been done, because it all touches on the problem space, right?
Mhm.
And what we're trying to do is to make sure that people are more or less familiar with the problem space before the in-person vocabulathon event, so they can go there already prepared and already know what we're going to discuss, so that we don't really spend all the time on the problem space. And
Yes.
and like one small organizational thing. So probably we will have from 2.5 hours max on the actual brainstorming session, right? Because there will be an introduction from each of the topics
Okay.
and the summary at the end. So the actual discussion will be around 2 hours.
Okay, that's good to know because in my head it was the full 4 hours. So I'm glad you said that it's not as big a chunk of time as I was thinking. And, and of course, I'm sort of grateful for the opening because as we've discussed, not morning people. So the 8 a.m. start is going to be a little rough. So I'm glad we're easing into it.
Well, if you want somebody from the vocabulary team or vocabulary folks to go through these previous sessions and maybe like prepare whatever presentation or do some intros, right? So we can discuss it. I think people can do that. Some of the folks can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in I think most of us in this group are coming at it from we use surveys. We need a way to describe this. Whereas I think the vocabulary group is coming at it from a different perspective. So I think it'd definitely be helpful to have that perspective. And again, like trying to work with a psychology group and themists and stuff, like how, you know, even as a working group, we're also not a silo, right? We have to interact with how these other working groups to kind of create the cohesive, this is how you do surveys in OMOP. So yeah, having that perspective from the vocabulary side would definitely be helpful.
Right, I'll try to engage more vocabulary folks so that we can sort of address ideas right away.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the idea that Piper put on the table, whether we're going to do very complex semantic model and all these sort of things, so we can right away react and at least explain what has been done in the past, whether it's even achievable or not.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
even the resources and the experience we have in general, everything is achievable.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. What is it? There's a Stephen King book called Everything's Eventual. I haven't read it. I just like the title, so I always take that as we can get there eventually, but we can't expect magic. Like we are going to have to go through the nuts and bolts of picking our priorities and getting bandwidth within the group to tackle some of these things. But I think we can start with something fairly close to the current model, which is mapping as facts, and then expand to thoughts we have on the question answer pairs. So what I have, Alexander, from our sub discussions is mostly that email chain, and then the one meeting we actually able to get to where we were talking about the fact option versus the question answer option or question answer pairs. Am I missing anything? Is that pretty much the gist of what we covered as that smaller group?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds good. And then real quick, Diane, while I have you, would you mind sending me the slides from when you presented? And also, can you let me know what surveys your group worked on mapping?
Yes, I think I sent the list in an email, but it was probably yesterday or Friday,
Oh,
so it
okay.
was probably lost in your email.
It
So
might be, yeah, because I was traveling and I'm still,
yep,
sometimes
yep.
it takes me a couple days to get caught back up. Okay, well, that's perfect.
I will
Thank you.
I'll dig out the other stuff that I presented and I'll send that along too. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we covered what we planned for today. So, like I said, Michelle will help us kind of collate the discussion points from this, and we'll also pull in from what we've talked about with the vocabulary and other groups, and kind of come through a list and see if we can define the problem space, as Alexander's saying, and also kind of set some goals for once this is defined, where else can we get to in the amount of time we have at the the Global Symposium. All right, so thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and I will be in touch.
Thank
Thanks,
you too.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.